Good morning. We are on the bottom of Yud Gimel Amud Beis, the Mishnah, 13b3. Okay, so we're going to have a discussion about different type of korah. So korah, again, is the crossbeam at the top, and the Gemara is going to have a large discussion about what is a valid korah, what is an invalid korah. That's the basic discussion today. So let's see. HaKorah sha'amru, the korah which was spoken about in the previous Mishnah, rechava kedei lekabel ariach. It's wide enough to hold a half brick. Okay, until now we haven't really thought about the dimensions, but now we're being taught it has to be wide enough to hold a half brick. Okay, ve'ariach chatz levena shel shlosha tefachim. A half brick is half a 3 tefach brick, which is another way of saying it is 1.5 tefachim wide. Okay, now the idea behind it is that the notion is it's supposed to look like an actual wall. Now, a wall, typically to build a wall, you need to have bricks. There are two sizes of bricks back in the day. There was a full-size brick, which is a 3 tefach wide brick, and there was a half brick, which was a 1.5 tefach brick. So the Mishnah is saying over here, you need to have a korah which is wide enough to hold the smallest size of a brick. In other words, it has to be strong. It has to look like it's actually the beginning of a wall. Okay, and the only way to make it the beginning of a wall is big enough to hold a brick. Again, bricks were the typical way which things were made. Straightforward.
This is the length.
This is the width of the korah. The width of the korah is that it's wide enough to hold this 1.5 brick.
So it has to be this. How far across?
We're not talking about how far across yet. We're just talking about the width of the korah.
I'm not sure I understand what the difference is here.
This is how fast it's long.
The depth. Correct. Meaning, here's a wall. It goes across.
So it has to be this amount so that you can attach it underneath it to start building the wall.
Correct. Now, again, it's going to be up on top, so you're going to start building the wall up here, right? Because the korah is the crossbeam; it's on top. But the point is that it's wide enough that you would going up or going down. The point is that it's wide enough that you could start putting something on. You could start making it into a wall. It's the beginning of a wall. Okay. Daya. Okay, says the Gemara, it has to be large enough to hold a half a brick. So then the Mishnah concludes, and therefore it's sufficient for the korah to be a tefach wide, in order to hold a half brick widthwise. In other words, what we're learning over here is how long. It doesn't have to actually be 1.5 wide. As long as it's 1 tefach wide, it would be wide enough to actually hold a 1.5 tefach brick, and there'd be a quarter of a tefach over on each side, right? In other words, if I'm holding something, I don't have to hold something which fits exactly my hands. It could go a little bit over. So basically saying it has to be 1 tefach wide. Why is it 1 tefach wide? Because 1 tefach wide is wide enough to hold the smallest brick, which is 1.5 tefachim. So it'd be jutting over a little bit on each side, a quarter of a tefach on each side. Okay, again, beginning of a wall. Says the Gemara, Rechava kedei lekabel ariach uvriya kedei lekabel ariach. Now the Mishnah continues. It says not only does it have to be wide enough to hold a brick, it has to be strong enough to hold a brick. Okay, so following the similar type of reasoning, that the idea is the beginning of the wall. Over here, however, we have machlokas. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Rechava, yes, it has to be wide enough, afa pishein bria, but it does not have to be strong enough. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda holds that as long as it is wide enough, that's sufficient. Because again, everyone agrees we're not actually building a wall. We're building something which is like the semblance of a beginning of a wall. First opinion says that thing that is beginning has to not only be wide enough, has to actually be strong enough to hold that brick. Rabbi Yehuda says no. As long as it looks good, it's good. It doesn't actually have to be strong enough. It could be something which is, and we'll give examples in a moment. It doesn't have to be strong enough. It doesn't have to be strong enough or structured in a way that it's actually able to hold a brick. Okay? Says the rest of this Mishnah is, according to most, the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda says, Haisa shel kash v'shel kanim. Let's say the korah was a tefach wide, but it was made of straw or reeds. Now, straw or reeds is not going to be strong enough. You put a brick on straw or reeds, it's going to fall through, right? Rowan osaki ilu hishamatachas. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you view it as if it was made of metal. In other words, as long as it has the right width, even though it's made of a material that cannot hold up a brick, that's okay. Similarly, akuma rona sakilu pshuta. If let's say the korah was bent, we'll see different examples of bent. But let's say it's like this, then all of a sudden it has goes out, or it goes like this, and then all of a sudden it goes out. So it's not straight. It's not a straight line. So he says we see it ki'ilu pshuta as if it was straight. We'll see examples of that soon. Agula rona sakilu murubas. If let's say it was round, I mean it wasn't a rectangle, it wasn't squared, but rather it was like a log, right? Imagine like just a log. So it's a rounded log, right? Just like a log. Nonetheless, you see it as if it is square. Kol sheyesh be'akei. Now the Mishnah concludes with a little bit of mathematics. Kol sheyesh bo be'akeifo shlosha tvachim, yesh bo rochav tefach. Whatever has a circumference of 3 tvachim has a width of a tefach. Okay, how's that going for pi? Close enough, right? Pi is 3.14. Right? Okay, we all went to something. Okay, whatever. You have it. So pi is 3.14, and they're saying it has to be 3. Okay, so we'll get into a bigger discussion about that hopefully at the end of our share. Because we're trying to say it has to be.
But it's that you can have a round piece?
A round piece. It's a log, meaning imagine like a log, like a
Okay, like that.
rounded. The whole thing is rounded. Yeah, I should have brought the thing over. Yeah, but you got it. Yeah, okay. So it has to be the whole thing has to be rounded. We say okay, but it has to be ki'ilu holds a brick. So again, what was the width to hold a brick? A tefach. So we say if it has a diameter of 3, if it has a circumference of 3, then it's going to have a width of a tefach. Then it's the equivalent of a width of a tefach.
We just cut it. In our mind, we just
More or less cut it, correct, exactly. Ask the Gemara, tefach bai. Why is the Mishnah telling us that a tefach is sufficient? If you just told me he needs to hold up a brick of a 1.5 tefachim, then why is a tefach sufficient? Yeah, right. That's the straightforward question. The Mishnah first said it has to hold up a brick of 1.5, and then it said a korah could be as small as a tefach. What do you mean? It has to hold up a 1.5 tefach brick. So Gemara says, "Came into Rachel the kabel tefach. Once it's wide enough to hold a tefach. Ida chatzi tefach malabin lebetina. The other half a tefach, if you were building on it, you would cement with clay. Mashu mihagisa, mash mihagisa v'kaima. In other words, if let's say you were building something on a 1 tefach board and it juts out a little bit on each side, no problem. You would just put a little cement under and it'd be enough to hold it together. And therefore, since that could be done, therefore 1 tefach is sufficient because that really is enough to build a 1.5 tefach brick. Because if you were actually building something on top of it, you could use such a material, you could use something of that width, and then you would just add a little bit of cement on the sides to hold it together, kind of like whatever. You'd use a little cement on the sides to hold it together, and therefore it makes sense that a 1 tefach width is going to be sufficient. Okay, makes sense. Amar Rabba Baravuna Korah Sha'amru. The Korah which was spoken about, Tzricha Bria K'dei L'Kabel Ariach, has to be strong enough to hold a half a brick. Okay, right, like the Mishnah said. And then he says, "Ma'midei korah." However, the supports of the korah einon tzrichin shiu brian k'dei lekabel korah v'ariach does not have to be strong enough to hold the korah and a half brick. Again, so what's going on? Right, what's happening over here?
the side post.
The side post that holds up the main post, right? In other words, you have the korah, and then you have you have the korah, and then you have right, right, you have the korah. Okay, you have the korah. The Rebbe said work. Okay, the korah. Okay, these are the walls of your chatzir or your mavoi, right? And then you have the korahs over here. It's going to be a tefach wide. This, whatever. And then this has to be a tefach wide. But it's enough to hold up a brick. But then these, which hold it up, right? These little hook things that hold it up. In theory, if they are really not strong enough, that if they were, if you would actually put a brick on this, it's all going to collapse. That's still okay. As long as this thing is something which, in theory, if it was held in properly, would hold up a brick. Now, if this is made of straw, right, the brick's going to fall through. So if it's made of wood, it's going to be great. What about if this is made up of like hanger wire, so it's really, really light, right? So it's enough to hold up this little piece of wood, but if I actually put a brick on it, the whole thing's going to collapse. He says that's not a problem. That's not a problem. The main thing is the korah has to be strong enough. You don't have to go all the way again, because we're threading a needle over here, not really threading a needle, but the point is it's a virtual wall. At the end of the day, it's not a real wall, but we have to do enough that it seems substantial. So he points out, Rabbi Rafuna points out, yes, the korah has to be strong enough, but the hooks doesn't have to. The whole structure doesn't have to be strong enough. Okay, so
The point is that you see this and it reminds
exactly.
you
Exactly.
It has to be
Exactly. Rav Chisda Amar echad zeh v'echad zeh tzrichin shiu briin k'dei lekabel korah v'ruach. Okay, small machlokes. Rav Chisda says no. Those hooks do have to be strong enough. In other words, to just add to what Max is saying. The first opinion is saying okay, you see it and it's enough. But the other opinion says no. You look up and you see there's hanger wires, but it's like 2 thumbtacks over here. It's not really going to be seen as a wall. That's not enough. It does have to be a little bit stronger. Okay, small machlokas. Amrav sheishes niach korah gabe mavoi. Let's say a person placed a korah above a mavoi, uparas la machzelas, and then the person draped a reed mat over the korah. Right. So this is your korah, and over here, here's your korah. It's a good korah this time. And then I go ahead and I drape one of these 70s, 60s, whatever these these little thingamajiggies, right? And so it goes over it, but it's covering the top part over here, right? It's like all these reeds, right? So says the Gemara. Keep on, my page keeps on turning. Okay. Okay. I'm Rav Sheshes. A reed mat. And we're talking about a case where it doesn't reach the ground. There's 3 tefachim from the top of the bottom of machzelas of the mat until the ground. There's 3 tefachim. So korah ein kan, mechitza ein kan. There's not a korah here because the korah is hidden. I can't see the korah. If I walk through, I'm like, oh wow, this is a nice little vibe. But the bottom line is I can't see the korah at the top, and therefore it's not going to be a korah. And mechitza ein kan, it's not a full-fledged wall. Why korah ein kan? There's no korah here because it's covered. Mechitza ein kan, mechitza shagdaim bokim ba. It's not a partition. If we go all the way to the ground, we would treat it as a legitimate partition. Okay, but the fact that it's 3 tefachim up, what that means is therefore like little animals, little kids could pass through, and therefore we don't treat it as a wall. In other words, if it would be all the way down, even though it would be very flimsy, that would be considered a wall. The fact that it's not all the way down, there's 3 tefachim off the ground, it doesn't have a function of mechitza either, of a wall, of partition, and therefore that picture is totally invalid. Okay?
But by sukkah, it's okay.
So it has to be closer than 3 tefachim also. The Gemara says the same thing.
At that level.
As long as there's 3 tefachim between these two things, right? Then even by sukkah this would not be sufficient. By sukkah it also have to be 3 tefachim from the ground. Taner Rabbanan is tats. Korah hayotz mikosel zeh. Let's say the korah going out from one side. Now this is what I think you were telling me before. Ve'eno gatz mikosel zeh. It doesn't go all the way across. It goes from the right side of the mavoi, but it doesn't go all the way to the left side. Okay. Similarly, 2 koros. Echad yotzes mikosel zeh. V'achas yotzes mikosel zeh. One goes from one wall. One goes from the other. Ve'eno goes over. In the middle there's a gap. Pachos mishlosha. If the gap, whether it's the one when it goes just from the right side and doesn't reach the left, or it's when it goes from both the right and left that has a gap in the middle. If the gap is less than 3 tefachim, ein tzarich lavi korah acheres, you do not need to bring another korah, because anything less than 3, we say, what's the concept? Lavud. Okay, we're going to say lavud, and lavud means that basically anytime you have a gap less than 3, we see that as attached, right? That's the lavud straps in your sukkah, based on that same principle, that anytime there's a gap less than 3 tefachim, halachically, it's seen as attached. So if you have a korah and there's a 3 tefach gap in the middle, less than 3 tefach gap in the middle, halachically we see it as actually all one, okay? Okay, shlosha, if the gap is 3 tefachim or tzarich lavi korah acheres, then you have to bring another korah to add to the korahs that are there. However, we've seen this opinion throughout. Pachos me'arba, if it's less than 4 tefachim, he holds lavud is 4 tefachim. So if it's less than 4 tefachim, ein tzarich lavi korah acheres. Arba, if it's 4 tefachim, tzarich lavi korah acheres, you have to bring another korah. Okay, v'chein shnei korahs matimos. Let's say you have 2 twin korahs over an entranceway. Lo bezo kidei lekabel riach. Lo bezo kidei lekabel riach. Neither of them is wide enough to hold a half brick. Okay? Imekablos ariach lerachbo tefach. However, if together they could hold a tefach brick. In other words, if together they are a tefach wide, so you have 2 thin ones, right? You have 2 thin ones, and basically just the bird's eye view over here. We're gonna have a bird's eye view. Okay, so your bird's eye view of your korahs over here. You have korah over here, very, very thin, very thin. Each of these are not large enough, but since I could go ahead and place a korah over here, right, and that would hold it together, hold a korah on top of it, then that would be sufficient. Dun, 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 for those watching. Okay, yeah, so that would therefore work because it's going to be wide enough. Okay, however, if the double korah is positioned that it holds a half brick lengthwise, okay, which measures 3 tefachim, ein tzarich lavi korah acheres. Vim lav, if it cannot support the weight of the lengthwise half brick, tzarich lavi korah acheres. Okay, so he holds, it actually has to be a little bit stronger. It actually has to hold it lengthwise, not widthwise. And if it's not able to do so, then you have to bring another korah. Again, clearly we recognize when it's 2 side by side, it's not the same strength, right? As opposed to when it's just 1 tefach, and when you're balancing something on 2 thin things, it's going to be weaker. It has to be a little bit stronger. That the korah that the brick has to be held lengthwise, not widthwise. Okay, says the Gemara. Let's say you have, and here you have the picture on 14.8.2. 1 korah is lower and 1 korah is higher, right? They're not side by side, right? So Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rowan es Yona ki'ilu hilamata. We view the upper korah as if it was below, v'es tachtona ki'ilu lamala, and the lower one as if it's above. In other words, we view them as if they're on the same height. Okay. Now, even though they're not on the same height, we view them as if they're on the same height. Okay. Now already we're going a little bit further.
Doesn't matter how far apart they are.
Doesn't matter how far apart they are. Uvilvad, however, shlo tehel yona lemala me'aser ma'ama, v'tachton lemata me'asara, as long as the upper one is not higher than 20 amos and the lower one is not lower than 10 tefachim. Amar Abaye points out, Rav Yossi, Rav Yehuda, Savala Kavua Bechada, Rav Yossi, who is the son of Rav Yehuda, he holds like his father in one respect, Upaligale Bechada, and he argues in a different respect. What does that mean? Savala Kavua Bechada Islay Rowan. This halacha that he just quoted, that said if it's 1 korah is above and 1 korah is below, he has this principle called Rowan. We see it as if. Right? We saw in our mission over here, Rabbi Yehuda had that principle, we see as if, right? He said, if I have a straw korah, we see it as if it is metal. In other words, Rabbi Yehuda is a little bit more liberal when it comes to how you view something. So his son, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, held that even if you have a korah here, we see it as if it's over here. In that respect, he holds like his father. In what respect does he not hold like him? First Mishnah? And remember? Because what did he just say? He just said, Uvad shlo tehei el yonah l'al me'esrim. He said it can't be above 20 amos. Remember, the first machlokas we got into was, well, let's just read it inside. Upaligale Bechadi argues with his father in another respect. Di'ilu Rabbi Yehuda savar l'mala. Why is this red running so much? Di'ilu Rabbi Yehuda savar l'mala me'esrim. Rabbi Yehuda holds that a korah is allowed to be higher than 20 amos. Right? Remember, the Mishnah told us that the Chacham said it can't be higher than 20 amos. Rabbi Yehuda said it could be higher than 20 amos. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda said, B'tzoch esrim in, L'mal mesrim lo. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda said in our last quote that we just said over here that yes, it could go like one could be above, one could be lower, but if one is above 20 amos, it's not going to work. His father would say above 20 amos would also work. Okay. Fine. Further, Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rechava Af Pi She'ein B'Bria. Rabbi Yehuda, this is from our Mishnah. This is where there's the last Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda said that even though it is not sufficiently strong, we see it as if it's strong enough. Masni lo Rabbi Yehuda L'chia bar Rav Kamei de Rav. Rabbi Yehuda taught this Mishnah to Chia, the son of Rav, in the presence of Rav. Okay, Rechava Af Pi She'ein B'Bria, and he said, quoting our Mishnah, this is what our Mishnah said. Wide, even though it's not strong. Amrle Asni Rechava B'Bria. Rav interjected and said, Rabbi Yehuda, and he said, no, teach my son that wide and strong. In other words, according to Rav, Rabbi Yehuda does not argue about this point. According to Rav, both Rabbi Yehuda and the Tanna Kama agree that it's not sufficient for it to be wide enough, but it actually has to be wide enough and strong enough. Again, so according to Rav, he had a different version of our Mishnah. Ask the Gemara of Amar Rabbi Lai, Amar Rav, Rechava Arba Af Pi She'ein B'Bria. We have an explicit statement where we have at least one opinion holding that if something is 4 tvachim wide, even though it's not strong enough, then it's going to be valid. So why is Rav so adamantly opposed to our version of the Mishnah, where he says, if Rabbi Yehuda says it's just wide enough and not strong enough, it can't be? We clearly have a statement from Rav himself, saying that there is at least one opinion that holds, if it's 4 tvachim wide, even though it's not strong enough, it's going to be kosher. So he says, no, Rechav Arba Shani. If it's 4 tvachim wide, okay, which is much wider than we've been talking about until now, there it does not have to be strong enough. But what we're talking about over here is when it's very narrow, there does it also have to be strong? Rav holds everyone agrees it has to be strong enough, right? So again, let's just summarize. In our Mishnah, we had a machlokes whether or not everyone agrees it has to be the width to hold up a brick. The question is, does it have to be strong enough to hold up a brick? Tanna Kama says yes. Rabbi Yehuda says no. Rav says that really Rabbi Yehuda also agrees it has to be strong enough, but Rav would agree when it's 4 tvachim wide, then there is a valid view to say there it doesn't have to be strong enough because it's so substantial. Okay, says the Gemara further. Haisa shalkash, it was made of straw. My kamash v'lan, ask the Mishnah, what is the second statement of Rabbi Yehuda teaching us? Damrin and Rowan, that we have this concept called Rowan. Hainu hach. It's the same principle. In other words, if you recall in our Mishnah, we had a whole bunch of cases. Yehuda said, if it's not strong enough to hold up a brick, we see it as if it's strong enough to hold up a brick. Okay? We see it as if it's metal. Then he says, if it's made up of straw, then we also see it as if it's made up of metal. Well, once I said the first case, why didn't you say the second case, right? Once I say Rowan, once I say that I see something flimsy as if it's strong, once I say if I see something slightly invalid, I see it as if it's kosher, why do I have to go through all these cases? The Gemara answers, you might have thought that when a flimsy korah is made up of a material which is normally strong enough to hold up a brick. So for example, let's say it's made up of wood, but very thin wood, right? So Rabbi Yehuda would say, Rowan, we don't see it as if it's thin wood, we see it as if it's thick wood. But let's say it's made up of reeds, which reeds by definition are just like straw, which by definition is just like very breakable. You put a whole bunch of straw, you put a brick on it, it's still going to collapse. Maybe you don't say Rowan over there. Shelo babina lo amrina. You won't say by straw that will pretend it's like metal. Kamash b'la. No, he's coming to teach you. We do such a thing. Okay, so we've addressed the second case that Rabbi Yehuda taught us about Rowan. Now the Gemara asks further. Akuma ronas akilu pshuta. The Mishnah continued and said if the korah is bent in a way that it can't physically hold a brick, we view it as if it's straight. Gemara says pshita. Once you have the concept of Rowan that we see it as if, whether it's because it's very flimsy, or whether because it's a little bit bent, like it's bent in some way. Again, we would have the principle of Rowan, meaning I could see it as if, and it should be okay. So the Gemara says, no, Kamashblan Kid Rav Zera. The teaching is like that of Rav Zera. Rav Zera, what did Rav Zera teach us? Let's say you have a case, if you look at the picture, here the bend is a little bit more complicated, right? Because the bend is actually jutting outside of the mavoy. You see that picture on 14a3? The bend is jutting outside of the mavoy. Right? There, or, for example, he besoch esrim, the korah is within 20 amos, and then it juts upwards, and it juts upwards above 20 amos, right? Which puts it in an invalid place. Okay? Or if the korah is very low, it's just above 10 tvachim, and then the bend is under 10 tvachim. Rowan, still you say Rowan. Okay, so first let's look at this. We see if you would remove that curve, and the gap between both sides would be less than 3 tvachim. So again, look at that picture. Remove that half circle, the horseshoe, whatever, and remove the half circle. And let's say there's 3 tvachim between them, less than 3 tvachim. Then it's kosher. Okay? Ain't kol shili, you're not talking about ben zel shlosha. Ain't tzarech lavi kar acheres. You don't have to bring another one. Vim lav, and if not tzarech lavi kar acheres, you would have to bring another one. So Gemara says, "Onami pshita." Isn't this also obvious? Why does Rav Zera have to tell us this? Of course, if it's less than 3 tvachim, we always have the concept called lavud, right? So what's Rav Zera really teaching us? So Gemara says, "He besoch mavok mis bechutz min lavud tzrichalei." It's really that one case where the mavoi is bent outside of the mavoi. The case we have the picture. Why? So Madatim, I would have thought leichush dilma asilam shuchei basra. If the whole point of a mavoi is to remind me, right? And I start walking towards this mavoi, and I'm looking above myself. Oh, am I covered by the korah? I am, and I end up walking outside the mavoi. Now, Lavud went ahead and said it's a kosher korah. But when I'm standing under the circular part, I'm actually outside of the mavoi. I may have thought that there we would say, no way, because we're afraid you're going to go outside. Kamash Malan, he's coming to teach you, then no, it's still going to be okay. Fine. Further, Agula Ronasakila Muruvas. So the last case was if it's round, if it's like a log, then we see it as if it's squared. Hasulamali, why do we need this? It's really the same thing. Seifat Strichale, we need it for the teaching at the end, which is Kol Sheish Bekefa Shlosha Tvachim, Yesh Bo Rachav Tefach. If something has a circumference of 3 Tvachim, it has a width of a Tefach. Teach us pi, or a version of pi, that if it has a circumference of 3, then it has a diameter, has a width of 1. Minani Mili. The Gemara asks, where do we know this from? Amrav Yochanan Amakra. It says in the Torah, V'yaszi Amud. Shlomo made the pool. This is like the mikvah. He made a pool of metal. Eser ba'ama misfaso atzfaso. It was 10 amos from rim to rim. Ago saviv. It was circular all around. V'chamish ba'ama kamaso. It was 5 amos high. V'kav shloshim ba'ama yasv oso saviv. And it was a 30 amma circumference. So you see, it was 10 across and 30 around. So you see that there's this relationship between 1 and 3, that there's a 3 times, that basically, if you know what your diameter is, right? If you know what your diameter is, then you multiply it by 3, and that's how you get your circumference. Ask the Gemara, V'hikas faso. Wait a second, they were measuring there the rim as well, right? The rim was, there was a rim of the pool. Why is not then not counted? Amar Papa, Svaso, Svas, Perach, Shoshan, Ksibei. Regarding the rim, it says a rim of a lily flower. How wide is a lily flower's petal? Nothing, right? I mean, tiny, right? Nothing. She says, and thickness of the pool was a tefach, okay? On the bottom was but the rim at the top, it was like almost like an infinity pool. It was like just at the top, it basically just like a tiny little jet, and it was tiny, and therefore, Alpayim bas Yachel found it could hold 2,000 bas, so he said, still, there's a tiny amount. Okay, so it circulates from within, calculates from within, and therefore, don't worry about the extra tiny bit of the rim. We're not going to include that. Now, as all you know from grade school, that it's actually not 3, it's 3.14. So the Vilna Gaon, there's a very famous Vilna Gaon over here who makes the following observation. The Torah over here describes the line across as a kav. Okay, the gematria, bear with me, the gematria of kav is 106. Okay, however, in Divrei Yamim, when it has the same pasuk, it, so to speak, it seems like it misspells kav. It says kuf vav hey, which is 111. Okay, so if someone has a calculator here and they divide 111 by 106, and then you multiply that by 3, as it says over here, you actually equal 3.14 and it basically is exactly what pi is, and therefore, sorry?
1.5, nice. Pretty good.
No, keep on going. How many? No, just kidding. It's good.
I don't know about 10, 12.
That's pretty good. Okay, more than me. I know 2. What's it called? But the point is that actually equals the exact amount of pi, or more or less the exact amount of pi. It's 3.146, etc., based on that calculation. So the Vilna Gaon points out that it's alluded to over here. The other Rishonim points out the fact that it's not like perfect over here. That's not the point. Like none of us are when they're making measurements, they just want general measurements. We weren't looking for exact measurements. But again, the Vilna Gaon says it's hidden. It's embedded in the text that you actually have a more precise measurements of kav and kavo, and it actually does spell out 3.14. Have a great day.